The Burial of the Rats by Bram Stoker. Leaving Paris by the Orleans road, cross the Enceinte and turn to the right, you find yourself in a somewhat wild and not at all savoury district. Right and left, and before you and behind, and on every side rise great heaps of dust and waste accumulated by the process of time. Paris has its night, as well as its day life, and the sojourner who enters his hotel in the Rue de Rivoli, or the Rue Saint-Honore, late at night, or leaves it early in the morning, can guess, in coming near Montrouge, if he has not done so already, the purpose of those great wagons that look like boilers on wheels, which he finds halting everywhere as he passes. Every city has its peculiar institutions created out of its own needs, and one of the most notable institutions of Paris is its rag-picking population. In the early morning, and Parisian life commences at an early hour, may be seen in most streets standing on the pathway opposite, every court and alley, and between every few houses, as still in some American cities, even in parts of New York, large wooden boxes into which the domestics or tenement holders empty the accumulated dust of the past day. Round these boxes gather and pass on, when the work is done, to fresh fields of labour and pastures new, squalid, hungry-looking men and women, the implements of whose craft consists of a coarse bag or basket slung over the shoulder, and a little rake with which they turn over and probe and examine in the minutest manner the dustbins. They pick up and deposit in their baskets, by aid of their rakes, whatever they may find, with the same facility as a Chinaman uses his chopsticks. Paris is a city of centralization, and centralization and classification are closely allied. In the early times, when centralization is becoming a fact, its forerunner is classification. All things which are similar or analogous become grouped together, and from the grouping of groups rises one whole or central point. We see radiating many long arms with innumerable tentaculae, and in the centre rises a gigantic head with a comprehensive brain and keen eyes to look on every side, and ears sensitive to hear, and a voracious mouth to swallow. Other cities resemble all the birds and beasts and fishes whose appetites and digestions are normal. Paris alone is the analogical hypothesis of the octopus. Product of centralization, carried in an ad absurdum, it fairly represents the devilfish, and in no respects is the resemblance more curious than in the similarity of the digestive apparatus. Those intelligent tourists who, having surrendered their individuality into the hands of Messrs. Cook or Gaz, do Paris in 3 days, are often puzzled to know how it is that the dinner which in London would cost about 6 shillings can be had for 3 francs in a café at the Palais Royal. They need have no more wonder if they will but consider the classification, which is a theoretic specialty of Parisian life, and adopt all round the fact from which the chiffonier has his genesis. The Paris of 1850 was not like the Paris of today, and those who see the Paris of Napoleon and Baron Haussmann can hardly realize the existence of the state of things 45 years ago. Amongst other things, however, which have not changed are those districts where the waste is gathered. Dust is dust all the world over in every age, and the family likeness of dust heaps is perfect. The traveller, therefore, who visits the environs of Montrouge can go back in fancy without difficulty to the year 1850. In this year I was making a prolonged stay in Paris. I was very much in love with a young lady who, though she returned my passion, so far yielded to the wishes of her parents that she had promised not to see me or to correspond with me for a year. I too had been compelled to accede to these conditions under a vague hope of parental approval. During the term of probation I had promised to remain out of the country, and not to write to my dear one until the expiration of the year. Naturally the time went heavily with me. There was not one of my own family or circle who could tell me of Alice, and none of her own folk had, I am sorry to say, sufficient generosity to send me even an occasional word of comfort regarding her health and well-being. I spent 6 months wandering about Europe, but as I could find no satisfactory distraction in travel, I determined to come to Paris, where, at least, I would be within easy hail of London in case any good fortune should call me thither before the appointed time. That hope deferred maketh the heart sick was never better exemplified than in my case, for in addition to the perpetual longing to see the face I loved, there was always with me a harrowing anxiety lest some accident should prevent me showing Alice in due time that I had, throughout the long period of probation, been faithful to her trust and my own love. Thus every adventure which I undertook had a fierce pleasure of its own, for it was fraught with possible consequences greater than it would have ordinarily borne. Like all travellers, I exhausted the places of most interest in the first month of my stay, and was driven in the second month to look for amusement, whithersoever I might. Having made sundry journeys to the better-known suburbs, I began to see that there was a terra incognita, in so far as the guide-book was concerned, in the social wilderness lying between these attractive points. Accordingly, I began to systematize my researches, and every day took up the thread of my exploration at the place where I had on the previous day dropped it. In the process of time my wanderings led me near Montrouge, and I saw that hereabouts lay the Ultima Thule of social exploration, a country as little known as that round the source of the White Nile. And so I determined to investigate philosophically the chiffonier, his habitat, his life, and his means of life. The job was an unsavoury one, difficult of accomplishment, and with little hope of adequate reward. However, despite reason, obstinacy prevailed, and I entered into my new investigation with a keener energy than I could have summoned to aid me in any investigation leading to any end, valuable or worthy. One day, late in a fine afternoon, toward the end of September, I entered the Holy of Holies of the City of Dust. The place was evidently the recognized abode of a number of chiffoniers, for some sort of arrangement was manifested in the formation of the dust heaps near the road. I passed among these heaps, which stood like orderly sentries, determined to penetrate further and trace dust to its ultimate location. As I passed along, I saw behind the dust heaps a few forms that flitted to and fro, evidently watching with great interest the advent of any stranger to such a place. The district was like a small Switzerland, and as I went forward my tortuous course shut out the path behind me. Presently I got into what seemed a small city or community of chiffoniers. There were a number of shanties or huts, such as may be met with in the remote parts of the bog of Allen, rude places with wattled walls, plastered with mud and roofs of rude thatch made from stable refuse, such places as one would not like to enter for any consideration, and which even in water-colour could only look picturesque if judiciously treated. In the midst of these huts was one of the strangest adaptations, I cannot say habitations, I had ever seen. An immense old wardrobe, a colossal remnant of some boudoir of Charles VII or Henry II, had been converted into a dwelling-house. The double doors lay open, so that the entire menage was open to public view. In the open half of the wardrobe was a common sitting-room of some 4 feet by 6, in which sat, smoking their pipes round a charcoal brazier, no fewer than 6 old soldiers of the First Republic, with their uniforms torn and worn threadbare. Evidently, they were of the mauvais sujet class. Their bleary eyes and limp jaws told plainly of a common love of absinthe, and their eyes had that haggard, worn look of slumber and ferocity which follows hard in the wake of drink. The other side stood as of old, with its shelves intact, save that they were cut to half their depth, and in each shelf of which there were 6 was a bed made with rags and straw. The half-dozen of worthies who inhabited this structure looked at me curiously as I passed, and when I looked back after going a little way, I saw their heads together in a whispered conference. I did not like the look of this at all, for the place was very lonely and the men looked very, very villainous. However, I did not see any cause for fear and went on my way, penetrating further and further into the Sahara. The way was tortuous to a degree, and from going round in a series of semicircles, as one goes in skating with the Dutch roll, I got rather confused with regard to the points of the compass. When I had penetrated a little way, I saw, as I turned the corner of a half-made heap, sitting on a heap of straw, an old soldier with threadbare coat. "Hallo," said I to myself, "the First Republic is well represented here in its soldiery." As I passed him, the old man never even looked up at me, but gazed on the ground with stolid persistency. Again I remarked to myself, "See what a life of rude warfare can do. This old man's curiosity is a thing of the past." When I had gone a few steps, however, I looked back suddenly, and saw that curiosity was not dead, for the veteran had raised his head and was regarding me with a very queer expression. He seemed to me to look very like one of the 6 worthies in the press. When he saw me looking, he dropped his head, and without thinking further of him, I went on my way, satisfied that there was a strange likeness between these old warriors. Presently I met another soldier in a similar manner. He, too, did not notice me whilst I was passing. By this time it was getting late in the afternoon, and I began to think of retracing my steps. Accordingly I turned to go back, but could see a number of tracks leading between different mounds, and could not ascertain which of them I should take. In my perplexity I wanted to see someone of whom to ask the way, but could see no one. I determined to go on a few mounds further, and so try to see someone, not a veteran. I gained my object, for after a couple of 100 yards I saw before me a single shanty such as I had seen before, with, however, the difference that this was not one for living in, but merely a roof with 3 walls open in front. From the evidences which the neighbourhood exhibited, I took it to be a place for sorting. Within it was an old woman, wrinkled and bent with age. I approached her to ask her the way. She rose as I came close, and I asked her my way. She immediately commenced a conversation, and it occurred to me that here in the very centre of the kingdom of dust was a place to gather details of the history of Parisian rag-picking, particularly as I could do so from the lips of one who looked like the oldest inhabitant. I began my inquiries, and the old woman gave me most interesting answers. She had been one of the ceteuces who had sat daily before the guillotine and had taken an active part among the women who signalized themselves by their violence in the Revolution. While we were talking, she said suddenly, "But monsieur must be tired standing," and dusted a rickety old stool for me to sit down. I hardly liked to do so for many reasons, but the poor old woman was so civil that I did not like to run the risk of hurting her by refusing, and moreover the conversation of one who had been at the taking of the Bastille was so interesting that I sat down, and so our conversation went on. While we were talking, an old man, older and more bent and wrinkled even than the woman, appeared from behind the shanty. "Here is Pierre," said she. "Monsieur can hear stories now if he wishes, for Pierre was in everything, from the Bastille to Waterloo." The old man took another stool at my request, and we plunged into a sea of revolutionary reminiscences. This old man, albeit clothed like a scarecrow, was like any one of the 6 veterans. I was now sitting in the centre of the low hut, with the woman on my left hand and the man on my right, each of them being somewhat in front of me. The place was full of all sorts of curious objects of lumber, and of many things that I wished far away. In one corner was a heap of rags which seemed to move from the number of vermin it contained, and in the other a heap of bones whose odour was something shocking. Every now and then, glancing at the heaps, I could see the gleaming eyes of some of the rats which infested the place. These loathsome objects were bad enough, but what looked even more dreadful was an old butcher's axe, with an iron handle stained with clots of blood, leaning up against the wall on the right-hand side. Still, these things did not give me much concern. The talk of the 2 old people was so fascinating that I stayed on, till the evening came, and the dust heaps threw dark shadows over the vales between them.